I wasn't just walking out of a job. I was walking out with his entire house of cards balanced on my shoulders. My name is Marcus Holland. I'm 48 years old. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. And until 2 hours ago, I was senior systems architect at Titan LogixTech, a logistics software company that made a fortune off optimization systems I built over 13 years. 13 years of designs, iterations, breakthroughs. All of it mine. And yet here I was, standing in my boss's office while he laughed in my face. "Good luck finding work at your age, buddy," Graham Pierce said, smirking as he sipped his coffee from a gold-rimmed mug that probably cost more than my entire week's groceries. Tech doesn't hire guys pushing 50 unless they're CEOs. I didn't say anything. Not right away. I just watched him like I was watching a coyote bark at a thundercloud. Loud, cocky, but clueless about the storm rolling in. I had a cardboard box in my hands. My drives, external backups, notebooks, all my logs and build environments were inside. Graham leaned back in his chair like he just told a great joke. His suit was some tailored charcoal thing that probably had a name like the Wellington or some garbage. He always wore those. Thought they made him look powerful. "Let me guess," he said, smirking. "You finally realized you peaked here, huh? Thought you'd leave before the floor drops out. Not the worst move, honestly. But you should have talked to me first. We might have found you a comfortable landing spot. Something advisory, maybe." That's what he always did. Talked in loops of nothing. Advisory meant being shelved until you quit. Graham was all about optics. Flashy titles, big words, zero depth. Called me his operations guy in front of clients, like I was some IT technician he kept around to fix printers. "You want to know what's in the box?" I asked. He blinked, like it hadn't occurred to him to care. "Excuse me, in the box," I repeated. "Logs, backups, test environments, code snapshots, iteration sets, essentially my work." His smile faltered a little. "Uh-huh, and you think you can just walk out with that?" I nodded. "I know I can. See, for years ago during the audit, we revised the company's IP policy. You remember that?" He said nothing, just stared. "You had me write it. Legal reviewed it. You signed off without reading a word. I made sure version control data created off hours and off-site wasn't classified as company IP unless explicitly flagged." His mouth opened, then closed again. Color drained from his face like water from a cracked pipe. For a guy who always made a show of being in control, he suddenly looked very much like a man sitting in the wrong chair. I don't think that holds legally," he stammered. "It does," I said. "I checked twice with outside counsel." I wasn't mad. Not anymore. I was beyond that. This wasn't a tantrum or a power play. It was precision. Everything he thought he controlled had already been reweighted, reindexed, and recalibrated, and he didn't even know it yet. "You can't just walk out with all that," he said again. But this time it was quieter. Not angry, not bold, just desperate. I set the box on the floor and rested my hands on top. "You've been calling me your operations guy for years," I said. "Told clients you came up with the quantum neural stack. Told investors you were the one who optimized the express loop. I built those systems in my garage because you wouldn't fund them, every single one, while you were off playing golf with the board." He shifted in his seat like it was getting too hot. That chair, big leather, absurd, had always been his throne. I used to joke it probably cost more than my first car. Not anymore. Now I was looking at it for what it was. Temporary. "You're going to regret this," he said quietly. "I don't think I will." I bent down, picked the box back up, and turned toward the door. Just as I reached the threshold, he found one last ounce of bravado. "Where are you even going? Huh? You don't have anything lined up. And even if you did, they're not going to pay Titan's guy more than I did." I paused, turned just enough so he could see my face. "I'm not Titan's guy anymore." He tilted his head, confused. "I'm Nexus," I said, "as of last week." The silence hit like a slap. "You what?" I smiled. Not big. Just enough to let him know the lights were finally on, and he wasn't the one flipping the switch. "I signed on as CTO," I said. "They called last spring. You intercepted their email, said it was below my level. So I reached out myself. He stood, too late. You can't. But I was already out the door. As I stepped into the elevator and hit the button for the lobby, I could still hear him shouting through the glass wall of his office. Red-faced, stammering. No idea how much worse it was going to get. He thought I was just a background tech, the guy who made things run. He never once imagined I might also be the guy who could tear it all down. And that's what made this so satisfying. Not the job, not the title. The fact that I hadn't even started yet, and I'd already outplayed him. The funny thing is, it didn't even start with a plan. It started with a drink. It was the Titan holiday mixer. December, 2 years ago. Some rented out rooftop downtown, overpriced hors d'oeuvres, and a jazz quartet that looked like they'd been pulled off Craigslist 2 hours before the event. I was standing near the back with a lukewarm Coke in hand, watching Graham do what he did best, holding court. He was schmoozing Titan's board chairman, Arthur Klein, one of those old money guys with a firm handshake and a weak understanding of what we actually did. I wasn't trying to listen, but Graham's voice carried like a foghorn. He leaned in, grinning like he was about to deliver a killer punchline. Quantum neural stack, he said, swirling his drink. Yeah, that was me. My vision, my blueprint. Just had my ops guy build the bones. I blinked. That was it. That was the moment. Because the quantum neural stack had been my life for 7 months. I built in my garage long before Titan decided to greenlight the project. I ran power cables to my laundry room to keep my test rigs running overnight. I spent weekends fine-tuning loop handlers, trimming weight from the learning model so it could run hot under simulated delivery stress. Graham had never seen a line of that code, and yet here he was, claiming the patent as his brainchild, reducing my contribution to the bones. That night, something in me snapped. Not emotionally, but strategically. I stopped thinking like a builder and started thinking like a saboteur. Back at home, I opened a new encrypted folder and started compiling. Emails, timestamp threads showing early concept drafts, diagrams, and feedback loops with engineers long before the project even had a name. Git commits, each with my handle, my terminal ID, and metadata proving my ownership. Slack messages. Private channels where Graham's only input was looks cool. Can we make it sexier? Meeting notes. Summaries I kept because I'm the kind of guy who documents everything. Piece by piece, I built a ledger, not just a code, but the story behind it. A quiet, methodical dismantling of Graham's fiction. Then I did something I probably should have done years earlier. I reached out to Victor Shaw. Victor was VP of R&D at Nexus Systems, Titan's biggest competitor and Graham's personal boogeyman. He'd been trying to poach whoever was really behind Titan's edge for years. Problem was, every time a recruiter email came in from Nexus, it somehow never reached me. I only found out about that little detail when an engineer in HR quietly told me Graham had a gatekeeping filter set up to screen all external inquiries to senior staff. So I bypassed inbox entirely. I emailed Victor directly from a Proton mail address. We met for coffee that Friday. Victor was sharp, ex-technical himself before going corporate. When I showed him the documents, his expression changed. You're telling me this entire stack, quantum, the preload model, the cascade balancing, all of that was you? All of it, I said, start to finish. He didn't blink. You want a job? Not just a job, I replied. I want a seat at the table. And I want these patents under the right name. That got his attention. A week later, I was on a Zoom call with Nexus's legal counsel, walking them through everything. Code chains, draft archives, even internal project logs where I was listed as resource, Marcus H., while Graham was primary inventor. Not anymore. We filed new claims quietly. The legal team said it would take time, but the foundation was solid. Meanwhile, I stayed put at Titan, acting like nothing had changed. I kept coding, kept smiling, kept handing Graham just enough to keep him comfortable, but never enough to see what was really coming. Every system I touched after that, I documented twice. Once for Titan, once for me, And in every commit, every notebook, I layered traceable markers, encryption fingerprints, unique build tags, timestamp offsets. So when the storm finally hit, there'd be no mistaking who wrote what. And here's the kicker, the one thing Graham never anticipated. I wasn't just building code anymore. I was building a story, a narrative, a case, one that would be impossible to untangle once the lights came on. And those lights, they were coming sooner than Graham thought. 3 weeks from that day, Titan was headlining a global tech summit. Graham had bragged to everyone that he'd be giving a keynote on next-gen optimization frameworks. The deck was already in motion. The invite list was public. The live stream was locked in. Only this time, I wouldn't be writing his script. He'd be stepping on that stage alone, surrounded by people who thought he was a genius. And when they started asking questions, well, they'd find out who the real architect was. I didn't expect him to panic. Not really. When I walked back into Graham's office that morning, same corner view, same stupid leather chair, same mug that read leadership. It's not just a title. I thought he'd smirk, maybe lean back and do that thing he did where he steepled his fingers like some bargain bin Bond villain. I thought he'd play it cool. He didn't. I've accepted a new position, I said, sliding a white envelope across his desk. Effective immediately, with Nexus Systems. For a second, I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Confusion, maybe, then disbelief, and then pure, unfiltered dread. Nexus, he echoed, like he'd just heard a dirty word. As in, Nexus. I nodded. He opened the envelope with shaking hands. Just a basic resignation letter. No insults, no digs. But it hit him harder than anything I could have written. No notice, he muttered, scanning the paper. No transition plan. I don't owe you a transition, I said calmly. You told the board last month that everything I build is plug-and-play. Figured out. He pushed away from his desk and started rifling through a filing cabinet behind him. The desperation was setting in fast now. His breathing getting shallow, his words tripping over each other. There's got to be something. Hang on. Where's that HR policy binder? I watched him thumb through it like he was looking for a life raft. You can't just go work for a direct competitor, he snapped, finally landing on a page and slapping it down. There's a non-compete. Nope, I said. There's not. You said I wasn't executive level enough to justify one. I reminded him. That was your phrasing, remember? When legal asked if you wanted me on the exec contract track, you said I was essential talent but not sweet. He blinked, opened his mouth, closed it again, and besides, I added, if there had been a non-compete, it wouldn't be enforceable under Arizona law the way you wrote it. Another thing I mentioned 3 years ago during the revision process, which, again, you didn't read. He slumped into his chair like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. For the first time since I'd known him, Graham looked like a man who realized the ground beneath him wasn't as solid as he thought. You're making a mistake, he said finally. His voice wasn't smug anymore, just tired and maybe a little scared. We built something here, Marcus. This company believed in you. I stared at him for a long moment. No, I said quietly. This company believed in you. You believed in me doing the work for you. He didn't respond. Just sat there, surrounded by plaques with his name on them, awards he didn't earn, framed articles quoting him as a visionary behind systems he barely understood. I stood up and picked up my box. Same one from the day before. Drives, notebooks, physical logs. I didn't need them anymore, but I wanted him to see them again. Just a little reminder that I wasn't leaving empty-handed. As I turned to leave, he reached for one last card. I gave you a platform, Marcus, he called after me. You think Nexus is going to worship you? You think you're going to be some rock star just because you built a few systems? I paused at the doorway, turned around. I don't need worship, I said. I just need the truth on record. I pushed open the glass door. As I stepped into the hallway, he called out again, quieter this time. You'll regret this. I didn't answer. I just walked past the bullpen, past the same half-curious glances from analysts who never quite understood what I actually did, past the HR lounge with its empty snack rack and passive-aggressive, Clean up after yourself sign. Elevator opened. I stepped inside. Hit lobby. As the door started to close, I saw Graham rush to the window near reception, phone in hand, already dialing someone. Probably legal or PR, or maybe one of the board members he'd sweet-talked into believing he was some kind of genius. Didn't matter. That fuse had already been lit. By the time I reached the lobby, my phone buzzed. Text from Nexus's counsel. Patent review complete. You're the primary inventor on quantum, and 3 supporting modules. Let's talk next week. I read it twice, then smiled. Not the polite corporate kind I'd been trained to wear. Not the forced corner-of-the-mouth version I used at investor meetings. A real smile, the kind you feel in your spine. Because the truth was, the real revenge wasn't quitting. It wasn't getting a better job or the title or the pay bump. It was this, letting the silence speak for itself. Letting Graham walk into that summit in 3 weeks without me behind the curtain. Without the slide deck I usually wrote. Without the crutch he never realized he leaned on. And when they asked him the first hard question, that silence would roar louder than anything I could have ever said. And best of all, I'd left breadcrumbs, version logs, commit trails, back-end docs, timestamps, a digital trail leading straight to his lies. By the time they traced it, I'd be 2 steps ahead. Because Graham always thought I worked under him. He never understood. I was always working around him. 6 months later, I stood on the same stage where Graham had unraveled. Only this time, the seats were full for a different reason. I wasn't here to cover for someone. I wasn't writing script behind the scenes or debugging someone else's demo last minute. I was the keynote, the closer, the name printed in bold at the top of the program. Marcus Holland, CTO Nexus Systems. Constrained harmony, designing the next leap in predictive logistics. I adjusted the mic, looked out over the crowd, some familiar faces from the last conference, some new, and felt that quiet, grounded thing in my chest again. Not nerves, not ego, just certainty. We've spent years treating optimization like a fixed formula. I began, but real-world systems don't care about formulas. They care about volatility, about supply shocks, fuel costs, late drivers, snowstorms in Colorado. And if you want to beat the chaos, you don't predict the noise. You learn to adapt faster than it can spread. Slide 1 lit up behind me. A full breakdown of our hybrid engine, the one we've been building at Nexus ever since the dust settled. Predictive layering fused with real-time adaptive rerouting. No buzzwords, just solid design. Something Titan could never have imagined, let alone shipped. I walked them through the stats. 81% reduction in route planning time, 44% improvement in delivery precision under unstable conditions, more than double the recovery rate after input disruption compared to industry benchmarks. But the numbers weren't the story. The real story was who built it and how. This system wasn't made by a lone genius in garage, I said, smiling a little. It was built by a team of engineers who respect each other, challenge each other, and I pointed at the back row where my team was seated, actually know how to listen. I paused there. Let that hang, because that, more than anything, was the difference. At Titan, I was a quiet shadow. At Nexus, I was the architect. And the voice, I got to see ideas become systems, and systems become products, not through politics or credit hoarding, but through collaboration, through real leadership. And the industry noticed. By the time I stepped off that stage, 2 Fortune 100 companies had already messaged our VP asking for demos. Our booth was packed for the rest of the day. One VC, who'd ignored our calls 3 years ago, asked for a private meeting, said he'd misjudged the landscape. I almost laughed. Later that night, after the applause faded and the cameras shut off, I sat at the hotel bar with my team. We didn't talk much at first, just sip bourbon and let the weight of everything settle. You realize, one of them said eventually, you've gone from being the guy behind the curtain to the guy everyone's quoting tomorrow. I thought about that for a second. No, I said, I think I just finally stepped out of the wrong room. We toasted to that. And here's the thing no one tells you about revenge. It's not always fire and fury. Sometimes it's just doing the work, proving, quietly but publicly, that you were never the problem, that the ones who ignored you, who stole from you, who told you to stay in your lane, they were just betting on the wrong future. Now I was building the right one. As the night wound down, my phone buzzed with a dozen new messages. Reporters, partners, 2 speaking invitations, even one from a university asking if I'd guest lecture. I ignored them for now. Instead, I opened the photo my VP had taken earlier. Me at the podium. Slides behind me. Crowd locked in. 6 months ago, Graham had choked in front of that same crowd because he thought visibility was control. What he never understood was that visibility without substance is a trap, and I had all the substance. It took 13 years, 3 job titles, a pile of stolen credit, and 1 spectacular collapse. But I was finally here, not just in the room, at the front of it,